welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show, we have Matthew Coe. He is the founder and COO of DeepScribe Inc., and he wrote the Kevin MD article, Examining Structural Racism in Health Tech. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
So I'm one of the co-founders of a company called DeepScribe. And at DeepScribe, we essentially automate clinical documentation. So our product records a natural patient conversation. And through that natural patient conversation, we're able to generate a comprehensive patient chart. And the story of how we came to it is pretty interesting. So I like to introduce myself as not a doctor. My background is actually in technology. I spent the majority of my career in consulting for data analytics. And we spent around a year and a half of research and development at the Berkeley AI Research Lab, developing the core technology that fuels DeepScribe. And we fell into this problem really from a patient's perspective. So when I was doing consulting, I was also serving as a care coordinator for my mom when she had breast cancer. And I live in San Francisco, and I was flying to Los Angeles, where I grew up, almost every week just to be with my mom, and mostly to be my mom's translator. So my mom's from Taiwan, and she doesn't speak English that well. And we like to joke that the idea of DeepScribe started when my mom asked me if I was lying to her about her treatment. And at first, I thought that maybe my Mandarin was a little bit rusty and she didn't really understand what I was saying. But it came pretty clear to me that she was being serious. And she would say to me, Matt, you're telling me everything is going well, but I'm not getting the same nonverbal feedback in the room. And it wasn't until my mom's oncologist answered a text message in the middle of delivering her prognosis where I just became an evil patient. I'm sure you and some of the listeners know evil patients. They go to Google to get their MDs, and they would walk in and try to tell the doctor what they're doing wrong. I became that patient, and it got to the point where I wanted to transfer my mom's care to somebody else. And that's when I went to my co-founder's father, who was an oncologist, to transfer my mom's care to somebody else. And it was really through him where I was able to appreciate the problem that we're solving today, which is clinician burnout, and really understanding what these physicians need to go through on a day-to-day basis just to be able to provide high quality, compassionate care to their patients.
Speaking from the perspective of health tech, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you want to convey to my clinician audience about the health tech side of healthcare?
The first thing that I like to say is, technology is an investment, right? I think a lot of physicians that I meet, they expect technology to be almost this miracle where the moment you start using it, it's going to work for you. And one of the things that I notice is that, clinical workflows are sacred, right? And for a physician to change something that they're so accustomed to, there's a lot of growing pains involved. And a lot of times I see physicians kind of just chuck the technology on the side of the road because they're not willing to make that investment. However, the physicians that I do see make that investment, they're able to really kind of ameliorate their workflow. So, our physicians, they tell us for the first time ever, they do not have to choose between compromising their own well-being and providing high quality, compassionate care. And I see that with a lot of other technologies in the space where my friends are founders of. It's that getting the physicians closer to the left side of the innovation adoption curve rather than the right side is the hardest challenge in technology in medicine. And that's why you see technology almost being the least pervasive of any industry that we live in.
So speaking from the physician standpoint, I think a lot of the reasons that explain what you say is that sometimes when we make that investment in terms of changing that workflow, the payoff isn't necessarily better than the status quo. So I guess when confronting new technologies that require that investment. So how can physicians be sure that that investment in time and that disruption workflow will be in fact worth it at the end?
I think a lot of that comes from, number one, the numerous unmet promises that the physicians are dealt with. I think starting with the advent of EHRs, right? Physicians were promised all these lofty things, and when the digitization of medicine really kind of became the status quo, it actually led to the physician needing to do a lot more things that they previously did not need to. And I think that distaste really carries on to a lot of the more innovative technologies that we see in medicine today. And I think just number one, knowing that the technology where it is today, at least in natural language processing, at least in artificial intelligence, deep learning, it is truly something different than it was back then, where people were, almost marketing this AI theater, right? I think now technology has really submitted a peak to be able to transform healthcare. But to answer your question, I think the first thing is just social proof, right? I think one of the things that really helps our physicians get over the hump is being able to talk to other people that have made that investment. And I think, we when we give references, we try to find people that are, if we can, exactly in the same town, or, at least in the same specialty, on the same EHR, has a similar workflow. But I think starting with the social proof and asking for that is a good first step, and making sure that that company is a right partner for you. It's not just a matter of picking a technology that is shiny and looks good on paper, but really talking to the people that are behind the company and seeing if they hold the same philosophical values as you.
All right, let's transition into Kevin MD article that you wrote. It's titled Examining Structural Racism in Health Tech. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure, yeah. So the article was really a response to a tweet that I read by the editor-in-chief of JAMA that said, "No physician is racist." And I felt the need to respond to this, as many as others did, but I thought that I had a unique perspective as a technologist that I thought it was worth sharing. And I think a lot of times physicians talk about, implicit bias with patient care, but I think the topic of algorithmic bias in healthcare is not really discussed, right? And I think that the algorithmic bias in medicine has really trickled down to the fabric of our healthcare system and really has dictated the way of how certain physicians practice medicine. So, an example of this that I discussed in the article is, when creating DeepScribe, we've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of doctors when we build our product. And we realized that, like you said, there's a lot of doctors that have tried these new innovative technologies and they failed them, right? And a lot of these doctors tend to be the ones that are kind of marginalized from where you see the majority of the data that is used to build these technologies is. So a good example is like in voice recognition. Mm-hmm. Today, voice recognition is largely seen as commoditized, but when it was first released to physicians and marketed to physicians, it was almost seen as this miracle, right? And a lot of these physicians that we interviewed, they are not native English speakers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these dictation tools failed them. And as a result, what ended up happening was they said, I'm never gonna, like you said, invest in this technology again. And it really dictated their workflow from then on. So what you see is like the way that I think a lot of people practice medicine is ruled by the amount of technology that they have available and how well that technology works for them. And I think it trickles down to also how providers practice care, right? So like for a physician that is very savvy on dictation today, because they've been using it for tens of 10, 15 years, they're able to give some more attention to their patients. And I talked to a lot of doctors that before they were just staring at a computer, and they would tell me, Matt, like I did not realize how much I was missing by just staring at the computer. Like after using DeepScribe, I'm always looking at the patient. And I didn't realize how much I was missing from providing care just by, not looking at the patient. And I think that trickles down to I think the algorithmic bias has led to some of the implicit bias that the physicians are facing today.
So tell me what the current scenario is when it comes to health tech startups. Are they aware of this issue of implicit bias? And whenever they do survey clinicians, do they take a cross section across socioeconomic lines? So what's the current situation like now?
I think it's often overlooked, Kevin. And that's one of the call to actions that I had in the article, which was, as a technologist, we also have a social responsibility to think about a lot of these things and think about the impact that the technology that we bring to the market makes. One of the biggest surprises that we had was we unintentionally not solved the problem, but we found that unintentionally our technology worked for a wider breadth of physicians that come from non-English speaking backgrounds, because the way that the technology works did not rely on the precision of the transcription rather than the ability for our algorithm to identify the relevant entities inside the transcription. So I don't think that the startups are thinking about it today. However, I do think that the level of sophistication in at least voice recognition has improved. So if you look at some of the modern day technologies, they are almost synthesizing multiple neural networks to be able to cater to different dialects of English. So in Dragon today, it's vastly improved because the way that it works today is it would actually detect kind of what type of accent is being said and merge them in real time rather than saying, hey, I need to buy this specific, Mandarin English version of Dragon to use. It's combining all of their models in the same time. That leads to better performance.
We're talking to Matthew Ko. He is co-founder and COO of DeepScribe Inc. He wrote the Kevin MD article, Examining Structural Racism in Health Tech. So Matthew, looking forward, so what specifically do health tech companies need to do in order to avoid the structural racism or the algorithmic bias that you talk about? And how are those solutions going to disrupt your workflow in terms of that path to innovation?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just really being aware of it, right? So just thinking about it. And I think, bias in AI is up and coming topic right now that a lot of people are thinking about. I think that to actually solve the problem is a little bit more difficult because you have to be a little bit more careful about the data sets that you're using. So, especially in voice recognition, if they're learning on all English speaking voice samples, it's going to perform better in English voice and it's going to actually perform worse in non-English speaking voice. So I think the first thing is to make sure that your data set is one of the features of your data set is to look at whether or not you have a population that represents the entire population. And that's one of the first things that we've had to do. For us, it actually came naturally because I myself am not native English speaker, and my co-founders aren't either. So the first guinea pigs for our product were actually all non-native speakers, and our first kind of core data set was actually the majority non-English, and it later became more English.
All right, and my final question: what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
The care that the patient perceives is the care that the patient receives. And that's one of the things that I learned, serving as a care coordinator for my mom. And I know that a lot of times physicians are burned out and they're just trying to get through the day. And a lot of times these physicians need to compromise their own well-being so that the patients can perceive a better level of care. However, at the end of the day, I think it makes such a tremendous difference to the patients. And studies have shown that the patient's perspective of their own present illness really dictates a lot of the outcomes. And for my mom, I know that was true. So, I think although it's difficult, I would say look at technology as an investment to help you achieve that. And hopefully one day we'll see technology as pervasive in healthcare as we do in the other industries.
Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin.